Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. Add this group called What Atheists Say versus Me. It's on Facebook. You can add it, and we've got content there how to debunk and refute atheism. So I had a discussion with a colleague of mine, a work colleague of mine, about atheism and the arguments they put forward about evolution and how everything can be explained through naturalistic causes. And he was a Muslim, he is a Muslim now, but previously he used to be an ex-Muslim. He left Islam and he adopted atheism and its ideology. And basically he believed in the Darwinian model, the evolution, and he denounced religion. But he told me that he accepted Islam again because, he no longer believed in those views any longer. And by the way, his background, he's a chemical engineer. So the guy's pretty brilliant. He's pretty smart, right? So it's really unfortunate because I wish I recorded the discussion, and I didn't because, it was just a thing that a conversation started, and we're already into the conversation. So I wish I recorded it, but I didn't. But what I'll do is I'll briefly go through some of the arguments that he used to use against believers or against religion or against the belief in God. And so I'll just go through some of those points. And it was interesting because I was actually telling him, I was saying, look, you pretend to be an atheist again, bring those arguments, and I want to counter it. I want to test my skills here, right? After what I've learned over the few decades that I've been preaching Islam and learning about, most of these arguments and how to respond to them. And he said, oh, cool, no worries, we'll go for it. So then he started bringing up these arguments. So what I'll do now is, I'll share those arguments, and I'm pretty sure most of you've probably heard these arguments before. They're not really new, but we did go into real detail, and I was really hounding him all the way through, and it was great. It was a good discussion. So without further ado, I'll go through the first one, and basically he was saying how we can't deny naturalistic causes. There are things that nature can create. And he spoke about diamonds, for example, how these majestic, beautiful diamonds can be created through mere nature. And now human beings are actually trying to create those same processes where they basically can confine and add these certain chemicals to a particular confined compression where they can actually create diamonds. And he said, look, it's this doesn't require God, and naturalistic causes can create these things. And so my counter response was, nature basically can create pattern waves. So for example, if you're on the beach, on the sands, you see the water come to you, and then it obviously goes back, and you can see the patterns left on the sea sand, and they're basically patterns. And I basically said to him, yes, nature can create certain patterns, move things apart, create sort of certain dynamics on a geographic region, but the difference is nature itself can't create complexity. What we mean by complexity is to engineer information, to make information, and that information then processes and like, for example, making a single cell, or like you'll see the flagella, like the sperm. If you look at the sperm, it has a tail, it has a rotary system, And nature basically can't just come there and just start creating these rotary systems like ATP synthesizing. And these things have rotary machines. You can see they've got like mechanical parts, and so there's complexity there. So that's different from patterns. So basically, I said to him, human beings have got those machinery parts, those biological machines, we call them. We're like biological machines. And so that's totally different from creating a diamond, right? There's a total difference between nature creating diamonds and nature creating complexity, living organisms, for example. You can see a demonstration here of ATP synthesized enzyme, for example, where, nature, this is different from patterns, right? You can see mechanical parts here. Have a look.
Would fit side by side in a millimeter. A current of protons drives the motor, unlike man-made electric motors which use electrons. This portion of the enzyme is where adenosine diphosphate is combined with a phosphate ion in the presence of a catalyst to produce ATP, which is then released, making way for the next cycle. A top view of the enzyme shows the sequential operation. Almost every biochemical process in your body requires ATP. Such a nanomachine exhibits all the characteristics of super-intelligent design.
Yeah, so basically that is different from, patterns. He mentioned how, DNA is also patterns, but the point here is that DNA still has coding systems, and DNA goes on to, is basically the force to create ATPs in the enzymes and things like that. So it's not simply just patterns. So this is pretty complex. And so nature, we're not seeing nature by itself do these things. He basically said things such as, nature can create these things, even biological machines. He said human beings can do it, so we're just part of nature and we can do it. This was pretty tricky because he's basically saying, look, nature itself over millions of years through human beings can create, biological machines. And basically I said to him, look, this isn't really true. And that human beings have tried to replicate certain enzymes, they've tried to manipulate certain enzymes to claim they've created, but at times they've always borrowed, for example, yeast from protein from already existing materials such as yeast to synthesize, to create synthetic life forms. And of course and he said, of course, we need to borrow it from somewhere. And he was basically saying things like, that's how nature works. Nature borrows certain things. He spoke about how the universe, for example, and how creation, came into existence. And he spoke about how, there was this drive, there was this error and trial and error, basically, he called it, where you'd have certain proteins, they would combine with other protons combining with other protons, and then it sort of rejects that and then moves away and then accepts another proton, and then it combines with that and causes a chemical reaction, and then it can go on and do all that sort of stuff. And he says basically that is the origin of life. You can still get life from that. But again, there's a lot of problems in that argument, because basically for you to go from A to Z, the sequence has to be correct. Anything missing from that sequence adds to the downfall of that product. And a perfect example of that is the human sperm. So the sperm cannot, for example, travel through the fallopian tube if it doesn't have the tail to propel it. If any bit of that sperm is missing, it can't function and it can't reproduce, and so forth. So again, you can't go from A to Z and assume that one proton or atom joined with another one and it created this and it built itself. For it to build itself, all the materials had to exist there and there. You can't just pick and choose, right? You can't just say, okay, it was, if it obviously didn't have all of its functions, it can't really do anything. It needs to have all of its functions from the very beginning to do something. He then spoke about how he could, these naturalistic causes can occur. It takes billions of years. And I basically said to him, look, if we're to expect nature itself, brainless Mother Nature that never went to school, and over millions of years processed all of these elements, and miraculously it all came together. Miraculously, even from the simplest forms, all these protons and neutrons and electrons and whatever from primordial soup just came together, and they started creating all these life forms and bacteria and things like that. And it just miraculously came together, even through trial and error. Suppose it did happen. If this is so simplified, why is it that human beings cannot create these things? Why can't we as intelligent beings replicate what Mother Nature did? And basically his response was, well, we can. We can do those things. And I said, how? Can you prove it? And he basically said, look, we can't do it now, but we could do it in, X amount of years. And he basically said, look, 100 years ago, we couldn't, send a man to the moon. We eventually did. We had all these technological advances. And so, of course, in the future, as we develop, as we progress, we can, as we get more in line in science, we can eventually create living organisms or living forms. And so my argument was, again, that really doesn't disprove God, because he just proves that it actually requires intelligence to actually create something. It doesn't just happen by chance. And he said, no, nature itself was intelligent. And so this is where the tricky part was, right? So he's saying, no, human beings are part of nature. Nature developed us human beings, and us human beings can then go on to create life, right? Just as Mother Nature did it. And I said to him, how are you even saying Mother Nature itself created these things? You're only hypothesizing. You weren't there a million years ago. You didn't see that nature from these small little bits of material came together and started creating life forms. You weren't there to actually experience that, to observe that. How can you even make that suggestion? And then, of course, he says, oh, look, we can produce diamonds. We can show that nature itself can produce diamonds. We can show those slow processes, in a machine where we can compress diamonds. And therefore, if that can happen there, then, of course, those natural causes can also create human life, living forms. And, of course, I already said that there's a totally difference between diamonds and human beings. There's a total difference, obviously, when you look at complexity. And I responded to him to say, look, could you imagine even a spastic child, a child that literally is born disabled, and that child goes on to create life forms? He literally just goes into a lab and starts creating life forms, would anyone expect that? And he said, no, of course not. But then he sort of stumbled and he said, no, yeah, it could. If you give that child, millions of years, they'll develop something like that. And I thought, geez, this is getting crazy. seriously, nature that doesn't have any consciousness. It's got no brain. It's got no way to think. It's got no way to measure and determine or bring elements together. But simultaneously, it did, and it created things. And all I said was replicate those very same examples. And he said, look, we can, nature itself created the brain. Nature itself created intelligence. Look at us human beings, we're intelligent. We have a brain. And I said to him, okay, fair enough. So he's trying to trap me, right? He's trying to trap me. And I said, okay, fair enough. Do you believe that nature itself can go through a junkyard, a scrap metal junkyard, and over millions of years, these elements, these metal parts, and they computerize and they become like an element where they start to come together miraculously, through nature, and it becomes like an airplane, a jumbo jet 747, as complex as that. Would you believe that? And he said, no, that can't happen. And I said, but you say human beings can come together through naturalistic causes, and we human beings are far more complex than a jumbo jet 747. I mean, you can create planes, but you can't create humans. I mean, forget about if a person lost his kidney, he needs to go on a kidney transplant register so he can find a donor. I mean, they can't create even a kidney for that person. He needs to wait on a donor's list. And you want to talk about nature just simply creating a human being? It doesn't work that way. We human beings can create planes and many technological advancements, like sophisticated cars that can reverse park by themselves, electric cars, all these amazing things, but we're not coming close to creating a living form. And basically he was trying to say, no, nature can do this. Human beings have got brains, they're intelligent. Nature can create a human being, therefore human beings can go out and create other life forms, and which is still part of nature, because he's trying to say human beings are part of nature. They are nature. And I said to him, if that is the case, let's move away human beings, right? Let's say human beings did not exist. Can nature itself go out and create a jumbo jet 747 plane? And he was like startled, literally. It was like a pin dropped, right? And this is the problem. They've come to an age where of course he's a Muslim, but he was pretending to argue for atheism, right? And he really couldn't object to that, right? He understood it. He would look silly if he keeps continuing. And it just goes to show that they don't value human beings. Human beings are far more complex than any aeroplane, but materialism makes us look at the West and see how advanced they are and how they're creating all this technology. But when they do that, we lose that focus on our own selves. Our human bodies are far more complex and complicated than any jumbo jet. Forget about jumbo jet. Any advanced technological product they've created, whether it's a CAT scan machine, whether it's an aeroplane, whether it's a spaceship, whatever it is, for that matter. Of course, at one stage he tried to go in the line of, what atheists use, the argument, of course nature can't really create an aeroplane because that's not living material and it's inorganic and things like that. But then the question you could trap him with is, well, didn't nature itself create everything, even living forms, from inorganic materials anyway? So again, that doesn't make sense. If these people believe that nature came from inorganic material and over time created organic material and living forms, then what's to say that nature itself can't create inorganic material and combine aeroplane parts together? And create a jumbo jet 747 for us. And so it just shows the ridicule in the atheist model. And then he basically was talking about this drive. There was always this drive to go towards good. And I basically because I basically said to him, how is it possible that we had so much trial and error, but it eventually all turned out right for us? We're here today, and we're writing about nature, we're writing about these materials, we're writing about the cosmos and how these things. How does it happen that we came from stardust, and now we're writing about stardust? And and he basically said, yeah, there was this drive. And I'm basically saying, what is that drive? What is that drive? There's always trial and error, but coincidentally, it all happened to fall in place. We had the right conditions. Yes, there were times where there was turmoil, but it never ended the universe. It never ended our planet. Yes, we had natural catastrophes, but it didn't destroy the planet entirely, and human existence flourished. The animal kingdom flourished. Yet, yes, we had extinct animals, but eventually everything turned out right. We're here today, and human existence is continuing. We passed all of the obstacles. Is this just a coincidence that we kept getting it right? Kept winning the lottery after lottery after lottery. It was the right conditions. We had the right amount of amino acids to create life. We had left hand or right hand, whichever one it is, that was beneficial for us. We had proteins. We had all of these enzymes, these chemicals, these biological chemicals. We had the right amount of pH levels in the water. We had the ozone protecting the earth from the earth burning up, the Van Houten belt against the harmful UV rays being emitted from the sun. This is all shaping the earth, and it's all miraculously. And I basically said to him, seriously, you have all of that, and then on top of that, you have all of this biological diversity. You have families, you have animals, you have good, healthy desires. You had good feelings, you have bad feelings. You have this conscious mind. On top of all of that, you have medicine that is in nature, herbal medicine if you get sick. You have all sorts of vitamins, different fruits of all kinds. If you need vitamin B, you go and eat meat. And it's healthy for your brain and for your development. And you have water that you need. And all of these things just compounding and compounding and compounding and compounding. You think to yourself, we won the lottery. We kept winning the lottery, right? And I said to him, you see that it actually takes more faith to believe in atheism than into believing in God. Because you can see that God is orchestrating all of this, is putting these things in places for our existence. And it's not just mere coincidence and chances and all of this nonsense. It just doesn't make sense. There's surely more to this than just simply coincidence and random mutations and chances that it all came to be the way it is. You can see that there's a purpose behind it, and it's not just simply random. The ecosystem, the balance the order coming out of this disorder, the Big Bang, right? It's the universe went bang, and all of this order eventually came about through all that disorder. It takes more faith to believe in the atheist theory that there was no intelligence behind it, and from all of this disorder came order. It just doesn't make sense, and there's more to it. And he actually said to me, it's true. I mean, that was the most compelling thing for him when he came back to Islam. He said, there's more to it. We're only seeing one pixel, and the larger pixel is, of course, it does take more faith to believe in the atheistic model than it is to believe in the creation view when it comes to creation and how things came about. Were they from just naturalistic causes, or was there a divine will? Was there a divine intelligence behind all of this? So yeah, that was basically the conversation. Of course, there was a lot more in there. I mean, from the top of my head, that's all I can remember on these crucial points. But yeah, that was a fascinating conversation.